My name is Carol Mitchell, and I'm 66 years old. I can still hear the sound of sirens in my head. Even now, it's strange how a single night can stretch across an entire lifetime. One moment, I had a home filled with laughter, photos, and memories the next. I was standing barefoot on the curb, watching 40 years of my life turn to smoke. The air that night tasted like metal and sorrow. It clung to my skin, heavy and hot. I remember holding my purse like it was a lifeline, though I can't even tell you what was inside. The fire trucks came fast, their red lights spinning against the dark, but they couldn't save what had already been swallowed by the flames. My house, the same one where my husband's laughter once echoed through the kitchen, where my son took his first steps, was nothing more than a trembling orange glow at the end of the street. I kept waiting for the panic to hit, but it didn't. There was only this strange, frozen calm, as if my body hadn't told my heart that everything was gone. A kind neighbor wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and I remember feeling almost embarrassed, like I didn't deserve comfort when I hadn't yet started crying. The fire chief spoke to me, his lips moving, his face kind. But all I could really make out were the words, "total loss." Those two words echoed in my head like a bell, soft at first, then louder, until they filled every corner of me. Total loss. My husband's old chair, the dining table he built with his hands, the wall where I marked my son's height each birthday. Every little piece of ordinary life erased in less than an hour. As the crowd thinned and the sirens faded into the night, I stood there alone, watching the smoke curl upward into the pale morning sky. It felt like watching my own history drift away. 40 years reduced to ashes. I told myself I was too old to start over. But in that moment, I didn't even know what starting over meant. All I knew was that the home I had loved, the home that held every version of who I used to be, was gone. And as the first light of dawn crept over the blackened frame of my house, I realized something I hadn't wanted to face yet, that losing everything might just be the beginning of something I couldn't see coming. Before the fire, my days followed a rhythm that felt almost sacred. There was a quiet kind of comfort in the routine I had built for myself, soft, steady, dependable. Each morning started the same way. I'd shuffle into the kitchen, still in my robe, and reach for the same chipped mug my husband, Paul, had used every day for over 3 decades. It had a small crack near the handle and a faded picture of a sunflower. But I never replaced it. Some things just carry too much history to throw away. I'd make coffee, not too strong, and sit by the kitchen window. That window was my little portal to the world. It faced the backyard where Paul planted hydrangeas when we first moved in. They still bloomed, every spring like clockwork, soft purples and blues stretching toward the sun. Mornings were always my favorite. The house would be still, and I could hear the faint hum of the town waking up, a neighbor's dog barking, birds in the trees, the gentle creak of the old wooden floor under my slippers. It all felt like home, not just a place, but a feeling deep in my bones. That house wasn't perfect, but it had character. The screen door moaned when it opened, like an old friend sighing. The hallway walls were full of framed photos, crooked from years of little hands brushing past them. Every scratch on the hardwood, every chipped tile, it all told a story. My story. There was a pantry door in the kitchen where I used to measure my son Josh's height, each birthday, which mark a new line. I can still picture him beaming the year he finally passed my shoulders. He must have been 12, maybe 13. That mark was still there. Or it was. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to Paul's photo on the mantel, like he was still around. I'd tell him about the neighbor's cat getting into the roses again, or how I finally fixed the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. Silly little things. But saying them out loud made the silence feel less heavy. That house held so many layers of life, layers I didn't even realize were there until they were gone. I think we all live in routines that protect us. They give our lives shape and meaning, but we don't notice how fragile they are until the moment they vanish. Looking back now, I see how I clung to those small rituals. They were anchors. I didn't think anything could break them. Not at my age. Not after everything I'd already survived. I'd buried my husband. Raised my son alone. Paid off that house dollar by dollar. I thought I'd done the hard parts already. I didn't know, at the time, that what was coming would unravel all of it. It started with a smell. Not smoke at first, but something sharp, metallic, off. I remember wrinkling my nose and thinking maybe I had left the iron on upstairs. It was such a small moment. Harmless. Really. Just a faint wrongness in the air. Sunlight was coming through the living room curtains. Soft and golden. I remember that because I paused to admire it before crossing the room. My slippers barely made a sound against the rug. That detail sticks with me, the quietness of it all before everything exploded. I pulled back the curtain. And that's when I saw it. A flicker of orange behind the window. Just a shimmer at first. Like heat rising off asphalt in summer. But it grew fast. The wallpaper near the window was already curling. Blistering. The flames crawled up the side of the wall like they had been waiting for permission. And for one breath, I just stood there, frozen. My mind couldn't catch up with what my eyes were seeing. All I could think was, this can't be happening. There was no alarm. I found out later the battery had died months ago. I'd meant to change it. I even bought new batteries. They were still in a drawer. That tiny mistake, just one more thing I thought I'd get to, eventually cost me everything. The smoke came quickly. It was thick. Black. Choking. My eyes stung. And I could barely see. I reached for my phone on the counter. But my hands were shaking. It slipped. I heard it hit the tile. Bouncing out of reach. The fire didn't care. It kept moving. Hungry. Behind me. Glass shattered. A window gave up, letting in more oxygen. That's when the fire roared. It sounded alive. I didn't plan to run, I just moved. I grabbed my purse. Didn't even think to put on shoes. The back door was stuck. Swollen from humidity. But somehow I got it open. The air outside felt cold. Even though it was warm, cold compared to what I'd just escaped. I stumbled into the backyard. Gasping. Then came the sound, another explosion behind me as the kitchen window blew out. I turned. And the fire had swallowed everything. Neighbors came running. I couldn't make out their voices. Just shapes and movement. Someone, I think it was Jenny from next door, wrapped her arms around me. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. The fire truck showed up minutes later. But it felt like forever. The lights. The shouting. The rush of water, it all blurred. I stood there in the grass. Barefoot. Shaking. I watched as they tried to save what was already gone. My entire life, every photo. Every letter. Every birthday candle ever blown out in that house. It all went up in flames. And I kept thinking. Over and over, what now? The morning after the fire. Everything felt hollow. My body ached from the cold and shock. But my mind was heavier. I stood outside the charred remains of my home, what used to be my whole world, and tried to figure out what to do next. An insurance man came by around noon, clipboard in hand. Toneflat. Polite but distant. He said total loss, like he was calculating a broken appliance. Not a life. Talked about depreciation. Coverage limits. And how the policy might pay out around $90,000 if I was lucky. It didn't feel real. That number. It sounded big. But when I looked at what was left, it felt inshootingsmå. A few burnt spoons. part of a table leg. Nothing that made a life. I didn't have a phone anymore. It had melted in the kitchen, along with everything else. So I borrowed Mrs. Jenkins' landline, the same phone she's had since the 90s, to make the call I'd been dreading. I didn't even know what I was hoping for. Maybe just to hear my son's voice. Maybe to feel like I still had someone. Jason picked up after a few rings. His voice sounded warm at first. Surprised. He asked if I was okay. And I told him. No. I told him the house was gone. That I needed somewhere to stay just for a little while. Until things settled. There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough for something inside me to tighten. I thought maybe he was in shock. Maybe he didn't know what to say. But then he said I could come over for now. Just until I got back on my feet. I clung to that. Clung to the idea that at least I had somewhere to go. That my son, my only child, would take me in. That night, I packed what little I had, one change of clothes. My ID. A pair of shoes someone from the Red Cross had given me, and called for a cab. The drive to Jason's neighborhood felt like entering another world. Wide lawns. Quiet streets. Houses that looked like they'd been copied and pasted from a magazine. I sat in the back of the cab staring at the symmetry of it all. Feeling like a misplaced puzzle piece. When we pulled up to his house, I hesitated before getting out. I needed a second to breathe. To find my courage. Jason opened the door before I could even knock. He looked fine. Polished. Behind him stood Rebecca, his fiancée. Always put together. Always polite. But always slightly on guard around me. Like I was an unexpected guest at a party she didn't throw. She gave me one of those smiles that never reached the eyes and said she was sorry for my loss. But her eyes flicked to the small suitcase in my hand, like it offended her perfectly curated space. They let me in. The house was spotless. White furniture. Glass tables. Hardwood floors that gleamed. It smelled like lemon cleaner and lavender. I sat down. Carefully. Like I didn't want to leave a mark. I told them I'd only need to stay a few weeks. Just until the insurance money came through. I even offered to cook. To help around the house. And then, everything shifted. Rebecca reached for Jason's arm. Her voice stayed sweet. But I could feel the wall going up. She said they were still building their life together. That they needed their space. That it wouldn't be fair to disrupt the balance they'd created. Jason didn't look at me. He just cleared his throat and said maybe I could look into one of those extended stay places. That he could help. With a few $100s. A few $100s. That was what 40 years of motherhood. Sacrifice. Scraped together tuition. And birthday cakes amounted to a few $100s and a gentle push toward a motel. I sat there. Still holding my purse. Feeling like I was fading out of the picture. I asked them softly. Because I didn't want to beg if they were really saying no. And they didn't answer. Not directly. Just vague expressions and careful silence. I understood. So I stood up. I thanked them. My voice didn't shake. Not then. But inside, I was collapsing. I walked out of that house without looking back. That night, I checked into a budget motel off the highway. The kind where the sign flickers and the curtains don't quite close all the way. The room smelled like bleach and old cigarettes. The mattress was stiff. And the air conditioner made a sound like it was trying too hard. But at least, it was quiet. By the third night at the motel, the silence started to feel heavier than the walls. The TV didn't work right. And the remote had no batteries. So I just sat there listening to the hum of the air conditioner sputtering like it might give out any minute. I washed my only outfit in the sink, with the tiny bar of motel soap, and hung it over the shower rod to dry. It was stiff and smelled like lemon chemicals when I put it back on. That was the first time it really hit me. I was 66 years old. And everything I owned fit into a suitcase and a purse. Not a single plate. Not one framed photo. Just fabric and plastic and silence. I sat down at the little motel desk. More of a table, really. And opened my purse, maybe just looking for something to hold on to. That's when I saw it. A small, worn business card tucked into the side pocket. The corners were soft with age. And the ink had faded. But the name was still there, Thomas Beckett. I hadn't seen Tom in over 40 years. We were young when we met, too young to make the kind of promises we made. He was the one who got away. Or maybe I was. Life pulled us in different directions. I got married. He moved out west. We lost touch. But for some reason, I'd carried that card with me all these years. Through marriage, motherhood, widowhood. I never could throw it away. I didn't know why. Until that moment, I stared at it for a long time. The phone number had a Savannah area code. I figured it probably didn't even work anymore. Maybe he had moved. Maybe he had passed. But I had nowhere else to turn. No one left to call. My son had shown me clearly where I stood. So I picked up the motel phone, old and beige, with a cord that tangled every time I touched it, and I dialed the number. My fingers shook the whole time. It rang once. Twice. And then, a voice. Deeper than I remembered. Slower. But still unmistakably his. When I said my name, there was a pause, just a breath, but it felt like the whole world stopped moving. He remembered. I could hear it in the way he said my name. Soft and certain. Like it had been sitting at the edge of his heart all this time. I told him everything about the fire. The house. The motel. I didn't mean to cry. But the words came out in pieces. Raw and broken. And then he said something I'll never forget. He told me to stay right where I was. That he was coming. That he had waited half his life for me to need him. I sat there staring at the phone long after he hung up. I wasn't sure what I had just done. I didn't know if I was making a mistake. But for the first time in days, I felt something stir in my chest that wasn't dread. It was small, fragile, but it was hope. An hour later, headlights swept across the motel parking lot. I watched from behind the curtain, heart pounding like I was a teenager again. A silver sedan pulled in and parked right outside my door. And then, there he was. Tom. Older. Yes. Gray at the temples. Lines around his eyes. But his smile, that soft, steady smile, hadn't changed a bit. It was like sunlight cutting through weeks of smoke. I opened the door slowly. And still unsure if this was real. And he stood there like he had never left. He didn't say much. And he didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to hold me up. He opened the car door for me. Just like he used to. And I got in without hesitation. We drove through back roads. Past marshland and moss-draped oaks that looked like they belonged to another century. The quiet wrapped around us like a blanket. Every so often, he'd glance over. Just to make sure I was still there. I think part of him needed to believe it. Too. When we pulled up to his house, my breath caught. It wasn't big or flashy. But it looked like it had been carved from the earth itself, wood, stone, and glass tucked along the edge of an inlet where the water moved slow and gentle. It felt grounded. Like him. Inside. It smelled like cedar and lemon polish. The warmth of it hit me before I even stepped fully inside. His house was lived in, but cared for. Photographs lined the hallway. None of me. Not yet. But it didn't feel empty. In the kitchen, he rolled up his sleeves and made me soup. Real soup. Chopped vegetables. Broth warmed just right. I sat at the table watching him, remembering the boy who once tried to cook pancakes on a campfire and nearly set his eyebrows on fire. He had always tried so hard to make me feel cared for. And now, 4 decades later, here he was doing it again. The first spoonful of that soup broke me. Not because of the taste, but because it reminded me I hadn't felt safe in weeks. Maybe longer. Warmth spread through my chest, easing a tightness I hadn't even realized was there. He didn't ask for an explanation. He didn't make me justify why I had called. He just said I was home now. That night, I slept in a guest room overlooking the water. Pale curtains danced in the breeze, and the sheets smelled like clean cotton and something familiar I couldn't name. I didn't unpack. I couldn't. It felt too fragile to believe this comfort might last. But every morning, Tom left a cup of coffee for me on the windowsill. Just how I like it, cream. No sugar. He remembered. After 40 years, there was something healing in that small gesture. A kind of quiet magic that said, "You're not invisible here." The days that followed felt like I'd stumbled into someone else's dream, a softer, slower world where grief didn't shout, but whispered through quiet kindness. Tom gave me space without making me feel distant. Every morning, I'd find that same coffee cup by the window. Always warm. Always, exactly the way I liked it. We started sharing breakfast on the porch. Just simple moments: eggs, toast, the morning sun glinting off the marsh water. He'd read the paper, humming out of tune, and I'd sit there listening, my spoon gently tapping the edge of the cup. I didn't talk much those first few mornings. I didn't have to. The silence wasn't awkward with him. It was safe, comforting, like resting your head on someone's shoulder without needing to explain the weight you carry. Eventually, I started to move around more. I cooked dinner one night, chicken and dumplings, just like my grandma used to make. I hadn't cooked a real meal since the fire. Watching him take a bite, close his eyes, and smile, that meant more to me than he probably knew. He looked at me and said it tasted like home. And I realized that's what I was starting to feel too. In those days, I began noticing how small things made me feel seen again. The way Tom handed me the dish towel without me asking. The way he let me set the pace. Never rushing conversation. Never crowding my quiet. He made space for me not out of obligation, but choice. We'd walk the property together in the evenings. That became our ritual. He'd show me his greenhouse, filled with delicate orchids he'd been growing for years. Every single plant had a little tag, a name, a note. That kind of care, it said a lot about who he was. I ran my fingers over the leaves, still wet from misting, and asked how he kept them all alive for so long. He said he had been waiting for someone to share them with. That moment, that stayed with me. For the first time since the fire, I didn't feel like just a woman who lost everything. I felt too whole. Not because I was healed completely, but because someone was walking beside me while I figured it out. About 2 weeks into this quiet new rhythm, my phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen since before the fire, Jason. For a second, I just stared at the screen. My heart didn't leap with joy or hope like it might have before. Instead, it felt like someone had cracked open a door I had carefully closed. I answered. His voice was careful, too careful. He said he'd been worried, that I'd disappeared. He wanted to know where I was staying. I told him the truth. I was with a friend. His tone changed. Suspicion crept in. He asked who. I told him. Tom Beckett, an old friend from Savannah. The silence on his end said more than any words ever could. And then came the judgment. Soft, passive, but clear. He thought I was being reckless, that I shouldn't be living with someone I barely knew. But here's the thing: Tom knew me. Not just my name or the version of me that had been shaped by responsibility and motherhood. He knew who I was. Before the years piled on. Before the grief. Before I forgot. I told Jason that. Gently, but firmly. I told him that Tom had been kind to me. At a time when my own son couldn't offer the same. He hesitated. Then admitted that he and Rebecca had talked. That maybe they'd overreacted. That if I wanted, I could come stay in the guest room until I found something more permanent. Once, that would have broken me with relief. I would have rushed to say yes, eager to feel wanted again. But now I knew better. I thanked him, but told him I had already found a place where I was treated like family. And I meant it. Every word. He started to push back, tried to justify their decision, but I stopped him. I told him something I wish I had said years ago. Love isn't measured in square footage or money. It's in the way you make someone feel. It's in respect. It's in presence. When he fell silent again, I let it be. And I ended the call with no bitterness. Just peace. Because in that moment, I wasn't choosing anger. I was choosing myself. Autumn settled over the marsh, like a whispered promise cooler mornings. Golden leaves. That soft hush in the air before the holidays creep in. Life with Tom had become something steady. Something sacred. We had our rituals now, coffee at sunrise, soup on rainy days, slow walks at dusk. Sometimes we spoke. Sometimes we didn't need to. One evening, as the sky melted into copper and rose, he turned to me on the porch. His voice was calm, but certain. He said we should stop pretending this was temporary. I thought he was joking, so I laughed. But he didn't. And when I saw his eyes tired, but clear, I knew he meant it. He said he had lost me once and didn't want to risk it again, that he wanted to marry me. That moment didn't feel dramatic or wild. It felt like breathing, like the most natural answer in the world. After everything we'd both been through, the losses, the waiting, the years filled with quiet longings, it all led here. We married under the old live oak in his backyard. On a crisp November morning. Just us. The pastor, his friend Marcus, and to my surprise, Miss Nancy, my old neighbor from Savannah. She made the drive, mascara running from the minute she saw me in my blue dress. I sent Jason an invitation. No +1. I didn't expect him to come. But he did. He stood quietly at the back. Hands folded. Eyes full of something I couldn't quite read. When I said my vows, I saw him wipe away a tear. Just once. Quickly. There was no music. No big crowd. Just lemon cake, warm cider, and laughter that echoed through the garden like old friends finding each other again. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And real, after all this time, was more than enough. Looking back now, I realize the fire didn't destroy my story. It rewrote it. It stripped away everything I thought I needed: furniture, photos, even the safety of my own family, but it left behind something far more precious: courage, clarity, and the freedom to choose my own happiness. I learned that asking for help doesn't make you weak. It takes strength to say, I can't do this alone. And when someone reaches back with kindness, you hold on to it. You let it in. You allow yourself to be seen again. I discovered that love doesn't have an expiration date. Sometimes, the universe holds on to a promise until you are ready to receive it. And for me, that promise came in the form of a man who remembered who I had been and chose to walk beside me as I became myself again. There were days when the mundane crept back: dishes to wash, bills to pay, aches in my back, but those were small. Real life. And real life, after everything, felt like grace. It was enough. Standing on the porch one evening, the air smelling faintly of salt and honeysuckle, I looked at the framed business card that had started it all. Sunlight glinted off the edges. Tom slipped his arm around my shoulders. And for a long moment, we didn't need words. The past, the waiting, the loss, it had all led to this. I whispered to him that sometimes the fire isn't the end. Sometimes it's the match that lights your way home. And in that quiet, I understood that hope, love, and second chances are never truly lost. They are just waiting for the right time, the right heart, and the courage to accept them. If this story touched you, please like it, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your story might just light another path too.